Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code, OmniPoke. For today's video, we're going to be going over the Gdansk Regional Championship results. It was over 1,300 players, and we have some interesting decks, a really interesting top cuts. But let's start off with the statistics of the Day 1 and Day 2 metagame. We have this tournament and then Buenos Aires, which are going to be the last events going into the LAIC. So in many ways, we're going to be looking at this as our last peek into this format. There were only two archetypes that were above 10% in representation. Raging Bolt coming out in 15% and Lugia VSTAR in at 12%. Surprising to see Regidrago VSTAR sub 10% despite winning the previous European Regional. And I think possibly after this weekend with another big result for Regidrago overall, I could see that going up definitely heading into LAIC. And then we have three decks in at 7%, Charizard, Dragapult, as well as Palkia VSTAR. And then getting into Day 2 of the graphic, we have Terapagos VSTAR, 6% was Gardevoir EX, and obviously I was casting the event, so I've seen the Arcanine list like metrics, so this 6% does include Banette Gardevoirs for the most part. And then there's a 5% for Iron Thorns, and again, there were a number of pilots of Iron Thorns plus Dragapult EX, and that's lumped in that 5%. With then 5% for Snorlax Control, 3% unclassified, and a lot of the time, control decks do go into that unclassified bracket. Oftentimes being called like Other Control, Other Snorlax Control, Mimikyu Focus Control, random stuff like that, because the counts of these controlling cards are changing all the time based on if you're like attacking with Mimikyu or Ogerpon, or if you're like a Pidgeot build. Oftentimes it's like Other Control as what it comes out as on Arcanine, so just something to bear in mind there. I think a number of these will be controlling archetypes, not all of them definitely, because stuff like Gouging Fire can be lumped into this as well, so take that with a pinch of salt, but certainly an amount of that will be controlling variants. So actually I think the 5% of Snorlax might be a small underrepresentation of like control overall. Maybe it bumps up like a percentage or two. Just something small to bear in mind. Then we have Miraidon at that 2%. I also think Gholdengo made it to 2% as well, but didn't quite make the graphics, so yeah, there were 1s and 2s of other archetypes in there as well. And then we have a big swing getting into Day 2 of the tournament, where Terapagos goes from the 7th most popular deck to the 1st most popular, so again, a very good Day 1 to 2 conversion. That's been a theme throughout most of the European tournaments, where Terapagos is underrepresented for how strong of an archetype it is. Raging Bolt losing out a little bit, Regidrago doing quite well in there. But the big story is that Charizard and Dragapult EX both are falling off the graphic, as is the Palkia VSTAR. None of those having a particularly good tournament. With Gardevoir EX, mostly the Banette builds doing very, very well and having that strong conversion, as were the Iron Thorns EX decks as well. And on the best of the rest, you can see just how far down the Charizard and the Dragapult fell. This is where you start seeing some specific variants of control. For example, this one's labeled Mimikyu Control, which is oftentimes just like a high Mimikyu count, high Cornerstone, less of the Snorlax. Lost Zone Box makes it onto the Day 2 graphic, as does the Terapagos Noctowl. This is actually like Palkia builds of Noctowl more often than not. And there are a couple of really interesting lists that we're going to look at today. So massive congratulations to Alberto Conti on his regional win. His first regional win, very, very strong player though. Actually just a 1-card change from his top 4 placement this season, where he's changed a penny for a switch. Because Alberto was interviewed so many times on the stream, we heard why he didn't have Noctowl in his list. Essentially, the Earthen Vessel is like a +1 extra good card to see in the opening stages. And there are a number of matchups where the 1/1 Noctowl, being that single prize Pokemon, can actually aid in other opponents' prize maps. So that was definitely interesting to hear. Other than that, it's a pretty streamlined build with just the best dragons, and also having the Temple of Sinnoh and Jamming Tower to respect various matchups. The Noctowl list of Regidrago is still doing well, so it is a bit of a pick your poison still. Now I've seen a win for both builds, and a huge number of top cuts for both as well. So Regidrago just in general is good, then you have to make up your own mind whether or not to play the Noctowl. There were 2 Regidrago in our clean top 8 cut, by the way, and Daniel Magda, recently aged up senior who has had a long list of accomplishments in ICs and the World Championships in that division, is now bringing another really interesting build of Regidrago VSTAR actually. This one feels like a throwback to the World Championships, where we see the double superior energy retrieval, the energy split at 8-2, having 4 Ogerpon and no Radiant Charizard, and just attacking with multi-prizes, and in fact having both Hisuian Gudra VSTAR and Haxorus in the list. I think this could easily have been one of the reasons why Daniel made it so far, is that the Bring the Axe Down attack is very good into the Terapagos builds now that Bouffalant is becoming more and more popular. You also just have an extra dragon hit that you can discard early on to reach that 230 threshold and initiate a prize race, but not a huge drawback. It's not an attack that you love to spam, but it's less painful than Lost Zoning 2 energy from a Giratina VSTAR, so it is just another decent proactive option. I'm still fairly skeptical of this card, but if you really do respect the Bouffalant builds of Terapagos, I do think this can be a nice tech inclusion. And then as for the Hisuian Gudra VSTAR, I also really like this one. I think it's solid in the mirror match, very good against Iron Thorns, which is otherwise otherwise a fairly dodgy matchup. And again, just adds to your overall volume of dragons that you can discard in the opening stages. That sometimes means you have extra Ultra Ball or superior energy retrieval fodder that lets you save on your V-Star power. It can also be pretty decent into the Palkia VSTAR matchup as well, so there's a lot of reasons to like the Gudra. I think it is worthwhile putting into the list at the moment. The main question marks I have is the lack of Pheasantipity EX in the list. We saw Raz get that fantastic Worlds finish with a list very similar to this one, so I think that's where the sort of inspiration has come from for this 60. In second place, we saw the inevitable Tord Reklev. He's always up there with a chance, and he's been rocking Terapagos EX as of late. Some really interesting counts going on in the 60. Many players had cut down to a 101 Pidgeot line, whereas Tord has bumped it up to 2-2, and actually gone very thin on the Dusknoir package, just going for a 201 line, really making the claim that you have to have Quick Search online to make this deck function. Tord has consistently played the Bouffalant in the list, and I do think it's a really strong card in the metagame right now, especially with Drago doing so well. It gives you a bit of protection against Kyurem, whilst also making all of their attacks very inefficient. If they're not playing Haxorus, they don't have an easy way through Terapagos, and that's where you gain your advantages. Tord also made it pretty clear that he wants to have enough resources to beat even controlling matchups, which he did in top 8. Having the Penny, Churro, Thornton, and Palpad in the 60 is evidence of that. And unsurprisingly, we also see the Lost Vacuum definitely going to help out against these Bravery Charmed Raging Bolts. Also solid into some of the Turbo Gardevoirs that we saw at the weekend, and can also allow you to do some shenanigans, getting rid of your own Underdepths for a bit of pseudo healing against some of the spread win conditions that the Drago players, as well as the Dragapult EX players, will incorporate against you. Tord got pretty unlucky in the final, but it's certainly a consistent deck list, and I think this is just another blueprint that we can take from him as the updated iteration for this 60. Next up, we have the couple Banette EX Gardevoirs. Definitely a cool deck that you saw a lot of on the stream, so if you want to see how this deck functions, definitely check that out. Magnus was able to win the mirror match in Top Cut, so got a top 4 placement. For the most part, this is a trapping archetype with that Everlasting Darkness denying item cards from the opponent. Especially with the 2 copies of Gravity Gemstone, you can do that often, whilst you slowly build towards your double Monkey Dory for Adrenabrain plays. Honestly, the deck feels so centered around this that I would even think about having Kasu in Heavy Ball in the 60, because I saw a number of games where Magnus and Mateusz, they were only finding one of their Monkey Dory because of prizes, and the deck just felt like so much slower and less threatening. As soon as you got the double Monkey established, you were in business. Some cool things to note, playing the 3-4 line of Curlier, just showing how powerful Refinement is, and also trying to weave in those trekking shoes so you have those extra digs to get towards the early enveloping shadow play when you either play going second, or just to see more cards to get additional basics developed. You want to get multiple Shut It Down, not just for multiple EXs that you retreat between, but also so you have access to your Puppet offering, and of course you want to have your Curlier engine online whilst also having the option to Psychic Embrace, so having those extra dig cards definitely feel like a good choice in the 60. This is surprisingly similar to like a Pidgeot controlling archetype in that you are progressing a prize win condition whilst trying to slow down opponents and buy turns. But having Gardevoir EX with double Monkey Dory developed in sort of mid to late game stages, you can put on a lot of pressure. And there's even the likes of Mew EX and Screamtail as well, that it's really not difficult for this deck to take enough prizes mid-turn with Monkey Dory to then switch your attack up and go on the aggression for the last couple of turns, knowing that you finally got into a position where you can win a prize race. Whereas in other matchups, like against other candy decks, simply announcing Everlasting Darkness throughout the entire game will be your win condition, and it's absolutely busted. Mateusz just has the extra Nest Ball, the extra Trekking Shoe for a counter catcher and gemstones, so having a couple extra consistency cards rather than power cards that Magnus went for, but the overall concept is the same here. And then the resurgence of Iron Thorns EX was the other kind of undercurrent over this weekend, where we saw 2 of them in top 8. Nothing too surprising going on with this 60, a couple of the Enhanced Hammer coming into the list that might be respecting Terapagos somewhat. But even then, if they're playing Bouffalant, the matchup is still really, really tough, I think. And then also in the top 8, we have Steve 60, which is the 1 E-Hammer, the 1 Charisma for extra acceleration, and a couple Lotto in the list as well. Small thing to note is that neither list really respected Mimikyu that much. There was 1 clone in Steve's list, 0 in Matthias's list. So really trying to target matchups and just say that you're going to lose to certain techs. Did get both these players quite far. And then rounding out our top 8 was a Snorlax Control. Did have a couple of the Mist Energy and actually the Regidrago, which you don't always see these days, but beyond that, pretty routine Snorlax things. As for the other interesting lists outside the top 8, we had Jack Blythe's Lost Zone box. Looks pretty similar to the Turbo Shell that we saw from Michael Davidson, but bringing back in that Iron Thorns EX as a more solid answer to the Lugia matchup. Certainly my favourite archetype from the weekend was the Palkia VSTAR Noctowl. It's an archetype that I've been playing for a decent amount of time myself, but with a very big twist in that it's playing 4 copies of Jet Energy, as well as 1 Volbeat, 1 Illumise. I'm sure you already know what they do, but the Volbeat allows you to attack on the first turn going first, where you can search your deck for 2 basic Pokemon. That means that if you have Jet's Poffin, you can go Fan Rotom Volbeat, Jet your Volbeat into the the active position and make sure that you can not only get your Hoot down, but also get the Palkia and Greninja established. And don't forget, you're going first, so on the following turn, you can be threatening that Moonlight Shuriken, which is one of the big power spike plays of this archetype. But then, if you go second, you can use the Illumise. You can only use this on your first turn if you have gone second, but you can shuffle one of your opponent's benched Pokemon and all cards attached into their deck. No doubt this card is going to create some gotcha moments against opposing V-Stars, which actually alleviates one of the big issues of this archetype, is that you're much weaker going second and you can't really protect your Palkia. Some previous iterations of this archetype has tried to use Thornton, so you only have a one prize board, then you force in via Noctowl a Thornton play to get into your V-Star. But this is another cool approach where turn 1 you can get the Illumise out, remove the attacker that's threatening you, and hope that your Palkia could be a little bit safer that way round. Jet Energy is also awesome with Fan Rotom, so it can get into the mix with its Assault Landing attack to deal with single prize Pokemon. And overall, I like a lot of the choices they've gone for here. The one-off judge is a little bit quirky, you have no real way to find this. And it feels like best used when you've gone second. It's actually something, again, that I've tested, but in a 4 count to have some reliability of using it. So that's a card that feels a little bit out of place compared to just playing a second copy of Irida, for example, which is really good on the first turn again, and has more utility in the mid-game than a judge, because you can just make your Palkia V-Star happen. But the one thing that I really want to draw attention to is the Quad Jet Energy. Not only is it fantastic for Volbeat Illumise as a combination, but it's also like a cheat code in the metagame right now. We've just seen Banette do really well. 4-Jet is really good against those. We know Snorlax is a powerful archetype. 4-Jet's going to absolutely annihilate them. And unlike Lugia that gets bodied by Iron Thorns, this should be pretty good into that matchup as well. I still think cancelling clones are worthy included into this 60, but overall I think this testing group got a lot right. I think 3 out of the 5 made day 2 who piloted this list, and it was also in the mix to make that top cut as well. So yeah, really powerful archetype. I'm really glad to see Palkia still thriving. And honestly, the 4-Jet feels like a cheat code. And as a side note, I also think that's part of the reason why gouging is so good. It beats all the nonsense matchups. It should be beating Banette, it should be beating Snorlax, it should be beating Iron Thorns. Just by virtue of having the 4-Jet in the 60, you get around so much nonsense. It's a really, really cool innovation for this list. And it's something I think we should be thinking about going into the LAIC, just seeing what decks can utilize a Quad Jet package so that you shrug in the face of some of these grief matchups. There were also 3 Turbo Guardies in top 16, so it feels like that's definitely like an underrepresented archetype in the game as well. Charizard just fell short, but did get a top 32 placement and is a fairly straightforward list. Alessandro actually decided to take prize cards for once by having Mimikyu Ogerpon as a deck. It's fun to see that it had Minior so that it could actually beat other controlling archetypes, and had Diancie in here because Lugia is still a headache. Man, quad Lux Cape on these Mimikyus. That's going to be so annoying to play against. There were some more Golden Go getting some placements in here as well. This one having a Morty's Conviction, the highest placing 60. There were once again a couple Gouging Fire. Again, Luke in the mix with this one. Kind of the brain behind the archetype. Like I said, 4-Jet Energy is definitely something I want to hang on to. It feels like it's just broken right now. Just outside, top 32 was an Area 0 Underdepths build of Miraidon. It's got obviously Underdepths that can help Raikou KO Bolt, but also Zapdos Vitband. And even this combination can help Raichu reach KOs on the likes of Dragapult. So some cool math fixing going on. And as we know, Iron Hands are still a threat in the format. The highest placing Dragapult was just a Dustoir build with no Pidgeot, but nothing too crazy in terms of counts. There was a really kooky Chempower that made top 64 as well. It had Greninja EX as a 101 line, as well as a Kyogre in here. And it also played the Jet Energy. That's actually crazy. So you can constantly reload Jet and Dynamic Wave to have a win con against control. That's actually wild. Is this a control tech? It must be, right? Genius! Chempower can actually win some matchups now. That's insane. Kyogre was actually just like an okay card anyway in Chempower. It's just another Pokemon you can shove. It's a one-prizer. It's often taking out Squawkabilly, Mew EX. We're seeing that in a ton of archetypes. Yeah, this card's just good. And then having the Jet... yeah, that's actually so smart. Well done, Nicholas. That's great. And the last deck we have to look at is a Garchomp EX Okidogi deck. Garchomp can help power up your dudes, so then you can just Luminous or Legacy attach to make sure you're getting in with your Okidogi. I don't know, it looks sus to me. There isn't a huge amount that blows me away. It does look like you're a relatively consistent build with the support accounts you got going on, and it does look like a bunch of Bravery Charmed Okidogi is just obnoxious for a number of archetypes. And let's face it, fighting type coverage is also really insane right now, so I don't know if underrepresented is the right phrase, but there is something to this archetype. So those are the highlights of Gdansk. I'm going to be doing an LAIC top 10 decks very shortly with my updates of what I would be doing to react to this format. For me, it feels like Regidrago is certainly going to be above 10% going into the LAIC, with some really strong pilots who have been rocking it recently. I think we definitely have to be prepared for the Thorns, the Banette, the Snorlax, the Cornerstone Ogerpon, the Pidgeot controls. We saw a few archetypes actually weaving in those Jet Energy. We've seen Gouging, Palkia, and even that Kyogre combination in Chempower, which has blown me away. I think those things are low-key really important to have going into this tournament, but also have attackers that can get through Cornerstone Ogerpon, get through Mimikyu queue. I'm not just cancelling Clone either, we need something that can get through multiple of these. Because if people are worried about Jet Energy and Lugia being too popular, they'll go for the annoying walls that just can't be hit at all. That's it for today's video. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you tomorrow for another one. Cheers.